Continuing with inequality. Having established the facts about it growing over time, we ask what can be done. What sort of policy tools do we have? One of the easy options is taxes. The graph on the right shows top marginal tax rate in different countries over time. We defined marginal versus average tax rates just a few lectures ago. In the last half century, we can see a diminution in the top tax rate, and it's pretty similar for many countries. Now, economics is complicated. People talk about how high tax rates can reduce economic growth. But in the past, a lot of countries had very high rates, and their economies grew really fast. It's not a simple case to make. The other chart there shows how the bottom 90% of people in the US hold on to their wealth. Mostly they're saving for retirement. Housing, that's in red at the bottom, used to be a big part, but then people took on more debt. Interesting article by Norton and Ariely surveyed people and just asked them, what is their ideal amount of inequality? How equal should society be? There'll always be some inequality, as some people make poor choices and other people work hard. In the survey, they divided their population into 5 groups. Top 20%, the next 20, so on, down to the bottom 20%. They asked how much income each group should get in an ideal world. People believe there should be a certain amount of inequality. The bottom 20% were suggested to get just 10% of income. The top 20% got 30%. That's that bottom bar graph. Next, they asked the people in the survey, what do you think is actually happening in the US? People thought the top 1/5 of the population got 50 or 60% of the income all to themselves. That's that middle bar graph. But the top bar graph is the actual. The top 20% of the population actually gets around 85% of all resources. Not only far from what people believe is ideal, but quite a long way from what they think is actually. The other graph shows tax revenue as a percent of GDP for different countries. The US is one of the lowest. Lots of other rich countries collect more in taxes, and their economies don't particularly suffer. We've done enough about macro stabilization policy to understand that its effectiveness depends on marginal propensity to consume. If, as in the pandemic, the government just sends money to people to help the economy, then that effect is multiplied to the extent that people spend the additional funds. Poor folks tend to go out and spend it. They haven't got much of a cushion. While rich folks might put the money in the bank and not really change their behavior much. So tax cuts don't have much immediate impact. When we think about targeting policy, it's worth considering persistence over time. If we imagine 2 different societies with the same level of inequality at a point in time, where some people are rich and others poor, if one has a high mobility while the other is low, we might consider the problem to be more about mobility than inequality. A society where kids have a chance to be wealthy regardless of their parents' wealth is very different from a society where kids are locked in. If their parents are rich, then they'll be too, or vice versa. Decades ago, the US had much more mobility, but that's gone down. So our country has more inequality, but also more solidified over generations. Making policy is more difficult, since the simple fact, political power follows economic power. Wealthy people can have enormous influence on the political system. In the US, our history of racial oppression also solidifies inequality and hinders policy changes. For a variety of reasons, times with more inequality tend to have less support for policies that promote mobility, so it can get baked in. Progressive taxation can be an important policy to ameliorate inequality. Tax the rich sounds simple, but there's ample economic data that supports its effectiveness. But we need to balance between the goals of getting a larger share of the pie or growing the pie for everybody. We can classify 2 sets of policies. Either they assume the size of the pie to be shared out is fixed, and then everybody wants a bigger slice of the same pie, versus policy can aim to grow the pie, to make the whole thing bigger so everybody can become better off. Try to distinguish under what conditions do we tend to see governments that desire one policy or the other. While we're talking about inequality and educational opportunity, let's talk about the City College of New York. We are #1 in the nation for overall social mobility. Students at City College are more likely to be making more money than their families did. So remember, your own experience is weird by the standards of the U.S. In many other places where people are born largely determines where they'll end up. Now, the study is perhaps all the more surprising because it's looking at the slow period of mobility, people born around 1980. We're not talking about Jonas Salk and Andy Grove and Colin Powell and all those Nobel Prize winners from back in the day. Remember, I showed graphs demonstrating that after about 1980, mobility in the U.S. slowed down. Even despite that, City College remains one of the best for social mobility. Other CUNY schools are also represented in the top 10: Baruch, New York Tech, John Jay, Hunter. This graphic shows two panels. Where the top 1% go to college, that's on the left-hand side, versus where the bottom 20% go. The blue are private nonprofit schools like NYU, USC, Duke, Emory, Harvard, others. Not many blue choices for the bottom 20%. Get out of the way there. All right, yeah, you can see it. The red are not attending college at all. There's a difference. The gray are attending colleges that don't provide much data. They're very small. The orange are public schools. But if you can see the names, you can see there's a difference in which ones. Rich folks, Colorado, Arizona, Michigan. Poor folks, LA Community College is the largest. Then the green are the for-profit schools like University of Phoenix. Those schools, which cost a lot and don't deliver much, are more likely to be chosen by poor folk. A few years ago, there's a big scandal about famous actor paying big bribes to get their kids into schools like USC and Arizona. It's a reminder that some educational institutions are actually doing work at educating the whole people. That's a basic mission at City College. Those words were written about 175 years ago. Other colleges have a different goal. If your family's already rich, they can help you stay that way.